Is Game 3 tonight between the Denver Nuggets and Oklahoma City Thunder a must-win for the home team? Can Nikola, Jokic, Jamal Murray and company shake off the stank of a 43-point blowout loss and keep this series interesting? And what are some things to keep an eye on as Broncos rookie minicamp kicks off today and carries into the weekend? All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the world of the NBA, where the Denver Nuggets have returned home and will take on the Oklahoma City Thunder in Game 3 of the Western Conference semifinal series, just days after one of the worst playoff and losses in general in the history of their franchise. They lose by 43 points in a game that they were never really in, considering Oklahoma City scored 40-plus points in the first quarter, set a playoff record with 87 points at halftime, and cleared 120 through three quarters. So basically at every stopping point throughout the game in Game 2, Oklahoma City was historically good, and the Denver Nuggets, on the other hand, were pretty historically bad in terms of their franchise history. And I am of the opinion that tonight's game is critically important for the remainder of this series. The winner of Game 3 in an NBA postseason 7-game series, when the series is tied 1-1, wins the series almost 80% of the time in NBA history. That's what history tells us. My eyes tell me that this is, regardless of history, a must-win game for the Denver Nuggets in this series right here, right now. They stole Game 1. They came out and struck blood first against the Oklahoma City Thunder on the road on almost no rest against the runaway number 1 team in the Western Conference. They took home court advantage in the process. They absolutely have to defend that if they want to have a puncher's chance at closing out this series as the underdog. And in honesty, that probably means winning games 3 and 4. But to hold serve and win both games at home, you got to win Game 3, and that starts tonight. So for the Denver Nuggets, the only hope, in my opinion, that they have of keeping this series alive and maintaining that home court advantage is to take Game 3 by reestablishing that grit and championship mettle and the intensity of play that they showed on the tail end of Game 1 to allow them to steal that thing without some of the sloppy play and turnovers and kind of general offensive woes that we saw from them early in that game that forced them to have to come back in the first place. I think you got Oklahoma City's best and strongest punch in Game 2 because they came out and played with a level of desperation, knowing that the Denver Nuggets, who've climbed the mountaintop before and have, regardless of he wins the MVP or not, who is largely considered the greatest player on earth in Nikola Jokic, they could not afford to fall down 0-2, starting the series at home and then having to carry things over into Denver. Oklahoma City showed you what they're capable of when their back's against the wall and they're in desperation mode. And therefore, going into Game 3, the Nuggets are now in that exact same position. And I think that it will show through similarly to how it did show through in Game 1. It's not impossible, and there are must-win theorists who have different definitions of, is it technically a must-win or is it not? No. The series isn't over if the Denver Nuggets lose tonight in terms of games left to be played. But historical context would tell you that north of 7 times out of 10, the team that wins Game 3 in a series tied 1-1 wins the 7-game series. And the Denver Nuggets, based on the opponent they're facing, the weaknesses that they currently have, and the strengths of the opponent that seem to conversely throw things back into the Nuggets' court, they need to hold serve at home, and it begins tonight. David Adelman talked about after the game about the mentality and the mindset going from Game 2 into Game 3 and bringing the series back home. He said, quote, finding that next level, your second wind, your third wind collectively, finding energy from each other is how you win these games. We had enough energy to win Game 1 after 2 days following Game 7. So why didn't I have enough energy last night? Why didn't they have enough energy last night? I think the guys have it. And inside of them, and I think they'll bring it tomorrow. So clearly that's pointing toward the notion that the Denver Nuggets are going to flush things away, as they alluded to at the end of their Game 2 press conferences, and reset and rack the mind. I struggle with that philosophy a little bit. And there's conflicting historical reports as to how the Nuggets have been able to execute that in the postseason. They lost Game 6 in LA against the Clippers and then came back and won Game 7 in emphatic fashion on their home court because they had the home court advantage in that series. Last season, in the postseason, the Denver Nuggets were blown out in absolutely historic fashion by 45 or 46 points, the largest blowout loss in Nuggets postseason history, in Game 6. And that was the game where Nikola Jokic was standing on the baseline next to the bench and just kind of ominously staring out at the court, watching his team have absolutely no answer for Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and the wave after wave that Minnesota continued to throw at Denver. And then in Game 7, on their home court, they gave up a 20-point second-half lead and got bounced out of the second round of the playoffs on their home court in pretty equally embarrassing fashion, although the score disparity wasn't nearly as large. So we've seen them do it, and we've seen them not do it in terms of coming back and rebounding after a blowout loss. I don't think you can afford to give up any more of those games if you're the Denver Nuggets. I know regardless if you win by 1 or you win by 31, it's still a win. So if you lose by 1 or you lose by 31, it still just counts as one loss in the stat column. But a 43-point loss carries a little extra weight with it, in my opinion. And I think it's human nature not to have some of that trickle over game to game throughout an individual series. We will see how it gets going tonight. I made my prediction earlier this morning when I was on the air with Mike Evans and Mark Schlereth. I think the Denver Nuggets do rebound from that Game 2 blowout performance. I think they do show some of that resolve and grit and toughness and championship mettle that they showed in Game 1. And I think that it amounts to something around the effect of a little bit lower scoring of a contest in like a 113 to 108 victory for the Denver Nuggets. And then, unfortunately, they have a must-win game, in my opinion, in Game 3. They're probably going to have to turn around in another must-win situation in Game 4 a little bit later this weekend in order to maintain home court advantage. So we'll see if they do it. When it comes to the Denver Broncos, things are just getting going in terms of their offseason programming as rookie minicamp begins today and carries over into the weekend. So this will be the first chance to have eyes on the 2025 draft class, along with the UDFAs and some rookie tryouts, including a former Sean Payton quarterback that I find kind of interesting. Our own Cecil Lammy and Andrew Mason will be feverishly covering things on location with eyes on, and I can't wait to hear what they report back. With some players who could be pretty impactful, I think, on this upcoming season, including who might be maybe the least talked about first-round pick in some time here in Broncos country, and that is Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. He, I think, was a surprise pick to many in the national media scene and landscape. He certainly wasn't who was most commonly, if very commonly at all, mocked to the Broncos locally or nationally. Because of the needs they have on the offensive side of the football. Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson, Quinshad Judkins. Earlier on in the process, it was Ashton Genty and Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, all of which kind of crept out of their reach as draft night came closer and closer because of teams having interest in jumping up and getting them before the Broncos pick at number 20. So the number 20 pick is on the clock. The Denver Broncos select their card, and on that card is not Omarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina, who was very commonly mocked to the Broncos and still available on the board at that time. They turn in the card for Jahdae Barron. And George Payton and Sean Payton essentially, if we were listening, telegraphed this exact move and told us exactly what they were going to do when they said that we as an organization are not going to step over Crystal for a blender just because we need a blender. And in this case, I think it's pretty fair to speculate that the blender is the running back position or the handful of players that they have mocked on their board as the top running backs in that class behind Ashton Genty. And that's exactly what happened. Jahdae Barron was a top 10, top 15 level talent on a lot of people's consensus boards that no one expected to probably fall past the Miami Dolphins in the early teens. And when he did, George Payton, the draft purist that he is not, it is not in his nature, it's not in his DNA to pass on just a football playing Jesse and a quality football player. Maybe not necessarily at the most glaring position of need, but at a premier position in cornerback at the NFL level that you truly can't have necessarily too many of. Kind of cornerback and edge rusher on the defensive side of the ball feel like the two positions that depth is kind of it's never ending in terms of how deep you can be and benefit from that. And we saw that when Riley Moss got hurt last season, and we had to watch Levi Wallace and Chris Abrams-Drain and others get picked on and torched by opposing offenses, most famously in the Cleveland Brown game where Jerry Jeudy got one of the best and most epic revenge games for a wide receiver in NFL history, and Jameis Winston, as he is wont to do on any kind of given night basis, went nuclear in the passing game. So Jahdae Barron, who might be one of the most slimly spoken about first-round draft picks for the Broncos that I've heard in some time, it's going to be curious to see, and we'll get our first chance to have eyes on just exactly how they're going to use him. Is he going to be an outside corner opposite Patrick Surtain, and you try to have multiple lockdown island-style corners on each side of the ball, which if Jahdae Barron turns into Patrick Surtain light, I think that's going to be a significant boost to a secondary, and you'll start having people whisper no-fly zone 2.0 with Chris Harris and Aqib Talib, and then you package that with secondary players like Talanoa Hufanga and Brandon Jones, and you have interior linebackers like Dre Greenlaw and a hopefully healthy and returning Alex Singleton. Is that going to be the outside focus? Is that where is he going to be inside, like in the slot kind of corner, nickel and dime packages, maybe potentially a threat to the long-term future of Jaquan McMillan? Or do they find a way to slot a lot of them? Do they just play a lot more dime and throw 4 stud defensive backs out there and minimize maybe the fact that they aren't very talented or deep at the moment on paper at inside linebacker outside of Dre Greenlaw? And so that's going to be, now we won't know for sure until we get the full team there because this is just rookie minicamp, but we're going to kind of get to see what maybe the Broncos have initially sprinkled in at plan for Jahdae Barron, who also possesses the size and skill set to be able to rotate in at the safety position if needed, whether via injury or design of formation and things of that nature. The running back in RJ Harvey, who I have speculated is going to kind of be, despite not being the first pick taken by the Broncos in this draft, he might be the most eyes-on player from the fan base and the national media about the Denver Broncos when it comes to this draft class because of the glaring need at the running back position that the Broncos experienced with the departure of Javonte Williams and the ineffectiveness of that room when it was Javonte, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime, and how unbalanced the Broncos offense was during Bo Nix's rookie season. So he may not have been the first player drafted, but he may be one of the most important players, if not the most important players, in determining and evaluating the success or failure of this draft class as a whole, specifically going into 2025 and perhaps the near future of 2026 and 2027, because the luxury of not stepping over the crystal for a blender. If you have the crystal, that's great. But you still got to blend up some margaritas if you're throwing a party. And you can serve those margaritas in crystal. That's great. But you still need a blender. So when I first took eyes on the Jahdae Barron selection at number 20, my first thought was surprising, not where I thought they were going to go, maybe not where I would have gone. And it's okay as long as you nail the running back selection. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson go just at the top of the second round. The Broncos don't move up to get them. In fact, they move back a couple of times before selecting RJ Harvey late in the second round. So if RJ Harvey can be the guy, if he can be your Bucky Irving, your Ray Rice, your Maurice Jones-Drew, all names who've been thrown out as potential NFL stylistic comps for RJ Harvey, if he can be that guy and he can bring balance to the Broncos offense as a runner to help set up the pass and then serve as an effective weapon in the screen game, the way we know Sean Payton, whether it's Reggie Bush, Darren Sproles, Chris Ivory, you name it, Alvin Kamara, loves to use his running backs in the screen game, then that will go a long way in both justifying the Jahdae Barron selection and boosting the overall evaluation of this draft class as a whole. He's also going to have a pretty big pass blocking hole to fill, or that room in particular is, because their best pass blocker in Javonte Williams, as well as the leading receiver out of the backfield for the Denver Broncos, is now a Dallas Cowboy. And then there's Pat Bryant, the big body, potentially misunderstood wide receiver out of Illinois, who kind of profiles similar stylistically to like a Tim Patrick or perhaps a Cortland Sutton. Big, long frame, lengthy catch radius, somebody that you hope can get those 50-50 balls and be a possession-type receiver over the middle of the field. And drew similar speculation and criticism coming out of the draft as one Michael Thomas for a slower 40 time in that 4.6 to 4.65 range. So if he's not going to be a guy that can take the top off a defense the way that Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin have proven that they can do, can he profile more as that possession receiver, running slants over the middle, finding the gap between the linebacker and the safety in the middle of the defense, and using that big body and that big frame to out-muscle contested catches and move the chains for Bo Nix in the offense. So what role will he play, and what kind of niche production can he carve out in a wide receiver room that still doesn't have a bona fide number 2 wide receiver? We know Cortland Sutton, whether you consider him a true NFL wide receiver 1 or not, he's the wide receiver 1 in the city of Denver and on that team. But the wide receiver 2 is theoretically up for grabs. In terms of receptions, Javonte Williams was the wide receiver 2. By yardage, you have candidates like Marvin Mims, potentially Evan Ingram, the tight end, the crown jewel offensively in free agency for Sean Payton. If he molds into the perfect Joker type piece that can work inside and allow Marvin Mims to be utilized more outside where he's more dangerous, I think, to make plays happen in space, especially if he gets his route running just a little bit sharper. Evan Ingram could be a name in that mix. Pat Bryant certainly could be a name in that mix. You would think that maybe after a pretty disappointing and up and down year for a guy like Troy Franklin, who has former teammate college chemistry with Bo Nix, and we saw that manifest itself with a couple of plays throughout the season, most memorably probably in the wild card game against Buffalo, where he and Bo Nix connected for the game's opening touchdown in the playoffs before things definitely went drastically different for Denver. Can he take another step forward? Devon Vele, the 7th round pick, who many were clamoring for week after week after week, because he continued to seem to make a lot of things happen with very limited interactions. Could one of them step up and be the number 2 option? Or, as our guy Philip Lindsay has speculated over the last couple of days, is the number 2 wide receiver for the Denver Broncos not even on the roster right now, in the form of a Keenan Allen, an aged veteran who can come in and kind of spot produce without having to microwave any production or chemistry with Bo Nix? So a lot of questions to be answered as we progress through the offseason activity. And then there's also names, because I don't necessarily want to gloss over the undrafted free agent portion of this, because the Broncos have a rich and storied tradition and history of undrafted free agents, not just making the team on a year-to-year basis, but finding significant contributors from a UDFA standpoint, from Philip Lindsay to Chris Harris. And you go down the line of genuine, memorable Broncos and contributors who brought winning and success to the organization despite being completely overlooked in the draft. So when you're going into this rookie minicamp and into the offseason, names like Courtney Jackson, Jerwan Newton, Joaquin Davis, and the like are guys at the wide receiver position specifically who could make a splashy surprise impact the way that our guy Phil and others have done in the past. And then I guess if you want to have a side fun little storyline, not as meaty as the others, but the punter, Jeremy Crenshaw, who the Broncos drafted, used a draft pick on for the first time in 9 years. It had been almost a decade since the Broncos used draft capital on a kicking specialist, punter, kicker, what have you. Well, they do it in this one. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that new Broncos special teams coordinator Darren Rizzi definitely sees something in this guy. And yes, they signed Matt Hack as a punter in free agency on a short-term deal. But I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out, because I promise you, special teams and adequate play in the special teams department is something that you don't realize how much it's needed or how good you have it until you lose it. And we've seen the Broncos under Brock Olivo and Tom McMahon and others have absolutely abysmal special teams, and how big of an impact that can have on an offense dealing with short fields, or I should say long fields, and a defense dealing with short fields to have to defend. It can significantly, if you don't have the ability to flip a field and give your team offensively or defensively some breathing room to work with, it can cause significant strain from a points per game perspective, from an offensive production perspective, and just a rhythm and game flow perspective. So while Jeremy Crenshaw might be not be the sexiest name, I think, of names to watch in rookie minicamp and in offseason activities as they continue to progress toward training camp, the performance overall of the Broncos special teams unit in the punting game specifically is going to be one to watch for. And we get our first glance of it today and this weekend with Broncos rookie minicamp. Can't wait to report back with you after what will be a very busy weekend with Nuggets and Thunder, Broncos offseason activities. Who knows? Maybe by this time on Monday when we return, Mikko Rantanen will have scored another single period hat trick, a natural hat trick. He seems to be Mr. Hat Trick in the postseason, and maybe the pain for Avalanche fans having to continue to watch that, or the glee and the joy if you're Mike Evans, who has kind of converted into being a Dallas Stars fan, it seems, so that he can feel better about the Stars beating the Avalanche. He may be the only one that doesn't have a feeling of pain in the pit of their stomach because of that. Regardless, we'll get to it all on Monday when we circle back with you. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Denver Sports 1043, at DEN Sports 1043 on Twitter. So much great content from Will Peterson, Jake Shapiro, Trent Finnegan, Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason, all of our talent up and down the lineup at Denver Sports 1043 The Fan, available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We'll catch you Monday.